As a 64-year-old widow, I thought I had faced my greatest fears. I was wrong. It arrived in a small cardboard box, my son's finger and a ransom note for $2.5 million. Samuel's voice on the recording was raw with terror, begging me to save him before they took more of him. My hands shook so hard I could barely stand. The guilt of being a career woman first and a mother second was suffocating me in my own living room. I was ready to empty my accounts, but then I noticed a detail that chilled my blood for a different reason. The courier box smells of ozone and cheap cardboard. That's the first thing I register, the contrast of it, how something so ordinary can arrive at the service entrance of a Greenwich estate at 11:58 on a Tuesday night, handed off by a man in a generic brown uniform who disappeared down the gravel drive before I could ask a single question. The box is light. Lighter than it should be for something that will end my world as I know it. I carry it to my study. The mahogany desk catches the lamplight in warm amber tones, and I set the box down precisely in the center of the blotter, the way I set everything down, deliberately, with intention. I am Diana Stevens. I do not fumble. I do not rush. I pull the packing tape free with 2 clean strokes and append the contents onto the blotter. The object lands with a soft, wet thump. My mind catalogs it in fractions of a second the way it catalogs everything: pale, the diameter of a thick board pipe fitting, the length of a first phalanx to the second knuckle. A severed finger. And on it, unmistakable, impossible, sickeningly real, my late husband's heavy gold signet ring. The ring that bears the Stevens crest. The ring I watched them slide from Robert's hand at the funeral home 12 years ago. The ring I placed in Samuel's palm 2 weeks later and told him, "This is your inheritance. Wear it." The ring is slick. The dark, tacky substance coating the band has not fully dried. The scent hits me a half-second later, copper and something organic and wrong, beneath the sterile smell of the study. My stomach does not lurch. It drops, as if the floor beneath it has simply ceased to exist. I don't scream. I am incapable of screaming. I simply stop breathing. The porch lights flicker once and die. The room plunges into the kind of darkness that only a perfectly insulated, 300-year-old Connecticut estate can produce, absolute, suffocating, and expensive. I find the tablet by muscle memory alone. My thumb slips on the glass face twice before the biometric reader catches my print and the screen blooms to life. The video link is already queued, auto-loaded from a contact ID I don't recognize, pushed to the front of my inbox with the aggressive persistence of a malware protocol. I tap it. Samuel's face fills the screen. I have studied my son's face for 32 years. I know every tell he has, the way his left eye tightens when he's calculating, the way his jaw goes slack when he's genuinely frightened. What I see on the screen is not a tell. It is a complete structural collapse. His boyish features are bloated and mottled, the redness of genuine crying in the creases around his eyes. He is slumped against a concrete wall, industrial, anonymous, somewhere with no natural light. His linen shirt is shredded at the left shoulder, and he is holding his bandaged hand against his chest like a broken wing. Salt tracks streak his tanned face. "Mom." His voice cracks on the single syllable. "Mom, please, they aren't joking." He gasps. He sobs. He begs for $2.5 million with the specificity of a man who has been told exactly what number to say. The camera pans, slow and deliberate, to his right hand, wrapped in a rag that has soaked through to a color that matches the trophy on my desk. The video cuts to black. I am left holding a screen full of nothing, standing in my own dark study, looking at my husband's signet ring sitting in a blood-dark halo on the blotter. The architect dies in that moment. She doesn't fade or retreat. She simply stops existing, as abruptly as a power failure. The woman who built Stevens Logistics from a failing regional shipping firm into a global powerhouse, who speaks to senators and sovereign wealth funds in the same measured, surgical cadence, she is gone. What's left in her place seizes. A violent, rhythmic tremor takes my hands first. My fingers lose their architecture, those steepled, precise instruments of control, and become something else entirely, something shaking and uncoordinated. The tablet slips from my grip, clips the edge of the mahogany desk, and hits the herringbone floor with a crack that resonates through the silence like a stone dropped in a well. I try to steeple my fingers. My most reliable anchor, the physical gesture that signals to my nervous system that the architect is present and in command. I press the fingertips together. They shake apart. My ivory skin feels 2 sizes too small for my frame. I am not a CEO. I am not a logistician. I am a 64-year-old widow standing in a room full of expensive objects that failed to protect the only human being still legally connected to her bloodline, and I am coming apart at the molecular level. The air in the study seems to compress, as though the walls are drawing inward, as though this perfect, climate-controlled room is slowly becoming a vacuum. The tremor migrates from my hands to my chest, where it lodges behind my sternum and takes up residence like a parasite. The shadows stretch across the hallway beyond the open study doors, and I look into them the way I used to look into actuarial tables, searching for data, finding only darkness. Every piece of art on these walls. Every Japanese maple in the east courtyard, pruned to geometric perfection. Every high-tech security sensor woven invisibly into the crown molding. Every square foot of this mahogany-heavy, climate-controlled, impeccably curated estate, I bought it all with time. With Samuel's time. The memory arrives without invitation. Samuel, 9 years old, sitting across from me at this very desk with a chessboard between us. He was quick, clever, impatient. When I countered his queen's gambit in 4 moves, he didn't recalibrate his strategy. He reached across and flipped the board. Pieces scattered across the Aubusson rug, and I said, calmly, "That is not how this works." And he looked at me with those hazel eyes, chin trembling, and said, "You never let me win." I had a conference call in 10 minutes. I told him we'd play again on Sunday. We never played again on Sunday. There was always another call, another crisis, another emergency that only the CEO could manage. The chess set went into a closet. The boy went into boarding school. And I told myself I was giving him the world by securing the empire that would one day be his. The guilt coils in my gut now, thick, suffocating, physical in a way that spreadsheets can never metabolize. Because I have finally found a problem that cannot be solved by a spreadsheet, and it is the direct consequence of every Sunday I chose the company over the child. The sheet of paper at the bottom of the box is a single page. Standard letter size. The font is Arial, size 12, deliberate in its anonymity, bureaucratic in its banality. No police. No discretionary notifications. He bleeds for every minute you waste. 3 sentences. No signature. No window for negotiation. I read them 3 times and feel something specific detonate behind my ribs. I am a woman who has built her entire operational life on discretionary notifications. I have a fixer in 6 time zones, a corporate attorney on permanent retainer, a head of security who answers his phone on the first ring regardless of the hour. I have redundancies for my redundancies. I have protocols for every foreseeable catastrophe. The people who wrote this note know exactly who I am. They mapped the architecture of my power and used it to construct my cage. They know that my first instinct, my deeply conditioned, 30-year operational instinct, is to notify, to delegate, to triangulate. And they have made that instinct a murder weapon. If I reach for my phone and dial a single number outside this room, I am signing Samuel's death warrant with my own hand. The ultimatum sits in my chest like a cold ingot of iron. My gaze drifts, as it sometimes does in moments of extreme stress, to the faint surgical scar on my left wrist. A thin white line, slightly raised, angled at 11 degrees, the precise angle of the warehouse crane cable that snapped in the port of New Haven 11 years ago. I had been on site for a systems audit. The cable took out my wrist before I could step back. I was in surgery for 2 hours, back at my desk in 4. The pain had been sharp and structural. Manageable. The kind of pain that has a name and a source and a prescribed treatment pathway. I touched the scar now. Run the pad of my thumb along the raised seam. I am trying to find her, the woman who evaluated a compound fracture and told the ER physician she'd need the wound closed before the anesthesia, because she had 2 calls to run from the recovery room. I am trying to excavate her from beneath the image that keeps superimposing itself on the inside of my eyelids, Samuel's face on that screen, Samuel's shirt torn at the shoulder, Samuel's hand wrapped in a rag that's soaked through to red. She isn't there. Not yet. The scar is just a scar. I close the study doors. It requires conscious effort, walking the 20 feet across the room on legs that feel decoupled from my nervous system, gripping the heavy mahogany handles, pulling both panels shut. The deadbolt engages with a click that rings through the room like a shot from a starting pistol. I lean my forehead against the cold wood. The scent of the study, old paper and expensive espresso, the smell of 1,000 late nights and 1,000 strategic victories, fills my lungs, and for the first time in 30 years, it offers no comfort. It smells like a bunker. It smells like the place where Diana Stevens came to die of her own competence, alone, with a severed finger on her desk and nobody to call. My breath hitches. A single, involuntary sound that I despise the moment it leaves my throat. I remain there for 43 seconds. I count them. Counting is the last available mechanism. Then I push myself off the wood and walk back to the desk. My secondary terminal sits to the right of the main workstation, a stripped-down machine with no corporate network access, no cloud integration, wired directly to a private fiber channel I commissioned under a shell entity 3 years ago. No footprint. No audit trail. I use it for competitive intelligence and for operations I prefer the board not see. I pull up the courier routing database and begin a trace on the package's digital footprint. Standard origination search, barcode origin, handler log, distribution hub transit. My fingers hover over the keys and stop. The data strings on the screen are gibberish to me. Not technically, I know precisely what each field means. I designed systems of greater complexity before this terminal existed. But the digital vision that lets me read a global logistics map as intuitively as other people read a newspaper has simply flickered out. I stare at the blinking cursor. The cursor blinks back at me. The image of the ring on that waxy knuckle has replaced my operating system. I try to push it aside through sheer mechanical will. I set it aside. It returns. I set it aside again. It returns again, more vivid, the dark, tacky substance, the precise weight of the ring, the sound of the wet thump as it hit the blotter. I cannot process a simple origin-destination sequence. I, Diana Stevens, cannot run a basic trace. I close the terminal window. The tablet on the floor chirps. A sharp, digital sound, too bright, too cheerful for the context. I cross the room and retrieve it from the floor, crouching with more difficulty than I'd like to admit, my knees registering the cold from the herringbone tiles. The screen has reactivated. Samuel's frozen face is still there, but now a countdown timer is superimposed over his slumped form in the corner of the frame. 5 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. The numbers are red. They pulse with a mechanical, metronomic indifference that I find more terrifying than any explicit threat. The timer counts down in seconds, each decrement accompanied by a faint, inaudible tick that I can feel rather than hear, a vibration in the glass, in my fingers, in the back of my teeth. 6 hours. I stand there doing the math with the part of my brain that never fully sleeps, the logistics engine. In 6 hours, Stevens Logistics can move 10,000 shipping containers from Rotterdam to the eastern seaboard. In 6 hours, my automated systems in Singapore will process 1,400 customs declarations. In 6 hours, the sun will fully rise over this estate, the birds of Greenwich will begin their second chorus, and the board of directors will be on the road. In 6 hours, my son will bleed again. Unless I stop it. The phrase from the note returns, permanent consequence. It rings inside my skull with the finality of a closing coffin lid, that specific sound, the hydraulic whisper of a casket mechanism I heard once and have never forgotten. I have 6 hours to prevent hearing it again. I sit in the leather chair. The mahogany is cold against my palms. I close my eyes. 4 counts in. 4 counts hold. 4 counts out. It is a technique a crisis counselor taught me after Robert died, a woman I saw exactly twice before deciding grief was a variable I could not afford. I never used the technique. I filed it away. I am using it now. I steeple my fingers. Press the tips together until the pressure migrates into the knuckles, until the fine tremor in my hands is forced inward by the mechanical resistance. My fingertips turn white at the nails. The tremor migrates to my chest, where it becomes a sustained, low-frequency vibration, something I can manage, something I can work around, the way a good logistic system routes around a blocked port. Not eliminated. Contained. The visceral fog begins, very slowly, to thin. What replaces it is not calm. It is something colder and sharper, a blade of pure, cold desperation that cuts through the grief and the guilt and leaves something functional behind. I cannot be his mother right now. A mother is paralyzed. A mother loops endlessly on the image of the boarding school drop-off and the chess pieces scattered on the rug in every Sunday that never came. If I am going to bring him home, I must stop being his mother. I must be his operator. I open the custom encrypted tablet. I built the encryption architecture myself, a 256-bit layered protocol with rotating keys that would take the NSA 17 months to crack and my CFO approximately 3 minutes to notice if I used the main accounts. I bypassed the corporate firewalls with the deliberateness of a surgeon working around scar tissue. To move $2.5 million without triggering a board notification or an automatic CFO alert requires a surgical strike on my personal offshore holdings, a set of accounts maintained under an entity structure that exists precisely for moments when I need to act without oversight. The architecture of my own financial privacy becomes the mechanism for my son's ransom. The irony is not lost on me. I built every wall in this system. I am now dismantling them for the one variable I never properly risk managed. My stylus taps against my palm as I work, a rhythmic, purposeful sound, the metronome of the architect beginning to reassert her rhythm. Tap. 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 Each tap is a decision. Each decision is a loss. I am gutting my personal safety net in the blue glow of a screen, and the steel-gray reflection in the darkened tablet glass is the face of a woman I am only just beginning to recognize again. The logistics of the ransom are simple. The logistics of my survival are not. The pale gray light comes first as a suggestion, a loosening of the dark at the edges of the heavy silk curtains, as if the blackness outside is losing its conviction. Then the birds. Greenwich wrens have no interest in the moral weight of Tuesday nights. They begin their morning chorus with cheerful, oblivious precision, indifferent to the finger on my desk and the countdown on my screen. I check my watch. The minimalist face reads 5:17 a.m. The hands feel like accusers. In 2 hours and 43 minutes, the board of directors will arrive at Stevens Logistics headquarters in their separate town cars, each carrying a copy of a competency petition they have been quietly assembling for the better part of 6 months. They have secured a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Marcus Webb, I am told, who specializes in evaluating high-functioning executives for early cognitive decline. They want my chair. They have wanted it for years, and they have finally found their moment. I have a severed finger on my mahogany desk. I have a son in a hole somewhere with a countdown timer on his face. I have a coup d'état arriving at dawn. I stand. I smooth my mahogany hair, the gesture is automatic, almost absurd under the circumstances, and yet it is the first thing my body does when I commit to forward movement. The chin-length blunt cut falls back into place with its usual architectural precision. The sprint, the pure, animal panic of the last 6 hours, is over. What begins now is something I am rather better at. The strategic advance. The morning sun arrives without mercy. By 6:40 a.m., the light has pushed through the gaps in the silk curtains and laid itself across my desk in clean, white slabs, a clinical illumination that strips away the forgiving ambiguity of the night. In this light, the stain on the blotter is unambiguous. In this light, the waxy pallor of what sits in the center of my desk cannot be attributed to shadow or imagination. I stand over it for exactly 4 seconds. Then I move. The silver letter opener shears are in the right-hand desk drawer. I use them with the deliberate economy of a woman who has worked loading docks and clean rooms in equal measure, no hesitation, no fumbling. I slide the blade's flat edge beneath the object, tilt it into the open mouth of the heavy-duty vacuum seal biohazard bag I keep in the emergency transport kit beneath the secondary terminal. The bag is rated for biological samples in transit. I use it approximately twice a year when corporate biosecurity requires certified chain-of-custody handling for pharmaceutical freight. I had not anticipated this particular application. I seal the bag. The air hisses out through the valve, the clear plastic collapsing around the waxy flesh and the gold ring with a slow, suffocating precision. The signet ring presses against the plastic from inside, the Stevens crest visible through the material, a raised relief of crossed anchors, the design Robert commissioned when he founded the original company. I tuck the sealed bag into the floor safe beneath my desk. The hydraulic panel accepts my biometric print without ceremony, the steel door swinging shut with a soft, final click. From the kitchen, 3 rooms away, I hear the distant clink of a breakfast tray. The household staff beginning their morning sequence, indifferent to the past 6 hours, as reliable as any automated system I have ever designed. I straighten up, smooth my blazer, and reach for the espresso machine behind the credenza. My hands are steady. The architect has fully subsumed the mother, the way a flood absorbs a candle, completely, and without remainder. The mahogany doors swing open at precisely 9 o'clock. I have always admired punctuality as a form of respect. Today it arrives wearing the face of a threat. Arthur Vance leads the procession, board chairman, 67 years old, former investment banker from a family whose wealth predates indoor plumbing. He is dressed in the way of men who want to be taken seriously without appearing to try, a charcoal suit cut conservatively, a regimental tie in muted blue, silver cufflinks that are expensive without being ostentatious. His face carries an expression of carefully calibrated concern, the brows slightly furrowed, the mouth arranged into something approximating sympathy, that stops approximately 3 millimeters before his eyes, which are the flat, evaluative gray of a fish market display. Behind him walks Dr. Eris Thorne. I had expected a clinician in his late 50s. Someone rumpled and academic. Someone I could manage. Thorne is 42 at most, and his suit costs more than a mid-sized sedan. I know this because I can identify bespoke Milanese tailoring at 30 feet, and the way the shoulder seam sit on this man's frame was not accomplished by a machine. He carries a slim leather notebook at his side with the casual authority of someone who understands that the notebook is a weapon, not a tool. He has the kind of face that reads as kind until you look at the eyes, which are doing something precise and continuous and patient, cataloging, measuring, assigning weight to every data point in the room. They bring the scent of corporate antiseptic into my study. It overlays the lingering metallic ghost I have spent the past 3 hours trying to ignore, and somehow the combination is worse than either element alone. Diana. Vance extends his hand. I shake it. His grip is the grip of a man who practiced his handshake. Arthur. I gesture toward the seating area. Coffee? Thorne doesn't sit. He accepts the espresso with a murmur of thanks and then simply drifts. There is no other word for it. He moves through the periphery of the room with a slow, proprietary ease, as though he is conducting an environmental assessment rather than a social call. His eyes move across the bookshelf, the credential wall, the arrangement of the desk. They linger, briefly but deliberately, on my hands, specifically on the way my fingers are steepled, pressed together in their habitual architecture. I let him look. He begins speaking in the tone of a man who has been trained to make clinical interrogation sound like idle conversation, a smooth, practiced baritone that carries no sharp edges. He asks about my sleep quality, about the board's recent concerns regarding my response latency on the Singapore contract, about whether I've been feeling the pressure of the company's current growth phase. High-pressure questions delivered in the cadence of small talk. He is probing for the the pupillary dilation, the lag in processing time, the reach for a word that doesn't come quickly enough. He is an expert in this. I can see it in the precise, unhurried rhythm of his technique. I give him nothing. I answer each question with the flat, surgical precision of a logistics algorithm processing inputs in real time. Response latency, 0. Vocabulary, complex and specific. Effect, neutral with calibrated engagement. I watch his eyes recalibrate and recalibrate again, searching for the crack that isn't visible. Beneath my feet, 3 inches of hardened steel floor safe separates us from the biohazard bag. My skin crawls with the knowledge of it. I give him nothing. The tablet pings. A Priority 1 notification, the designation I use for freight emergencies, for custom seizures, for events that require immediate executive response. It pushes to the front of the screen with a red border and an urgency flag. I tilt the screen toward my body, a motion so practiced it reads as instinctive privacy rather than concealment. The photograph is high resolution. Whoever sent it has access to good equipment and knows how to frame a shot. Samuel's eyes are open but wrong, the pupils fixed and dilated with a drug-induced glaze, the whites too prominent, the focus somewhere approximately 6 inches behind wherever the camera is. He is propped against what appears to be a different wall than the first video, white plaster now, a horizontal water stain at shoulder height. A matte black barrel is pressed against his left temple with the casual precision of someone who has done this before. The caption is a single, clean, bureaucratic notation, $2,500,000. 4 hours. The adrenaline is a hot tide that rises from my sternum to the back of my throat. Nausea follows it, a physiological response, involuntary, completely predictable under the circumstances, and utterly inadmissible. I swallow it. I do not break eye contact with Thorne. I tap the screen to archive, allow myself a single short, dry, mirthless huff, the specific exhalation I use for minor operational inconveniences, and set the tablet face down on the desk. Shipping delay in the Suez, I say. My voice is a flat line of indifference. The Canal Authority changed their inspection protocols again. 3rd time this quarter. Thorne's eyes flicker to the tablet and back to my face. He writes something in his slim notebook. Vance has been waiting for his moment with the patience of a man who knows he holds the better cards and wants to enjoy the reveal. He slides the document across the mahogany with the smooth, gliding motion of a dealer presenting a hand. It is printed on heavy vellum, not standard corporate paper, vellum, the choice of someone who wants the tactile experience of the document to communicate gravity and permanence. The header reads, Voluntary Leave of Absence Agreement, Stevens Logistics LLC. The board is concerned, Diana. His voice carries the warm, regretful tone of a man performing reluctant necessity. There have been some concerning liquidity shifts. Midnight capital movements. Personal accounts touching threshold levels that trigger our competency clause. He pauses, precisely long enough for the pause to do its work. We want to be supportive. They tracked the midnight transactions. Of course they did. I built the audit infrastructure myself. I know exactly how granular the automated alerts run. What they see is a CEO attempting to move substantial personal capital at midnight with no board notification and no documented business purpose. To a forensic accountant, it looks like either irrational behavior or coercion. To Arthur Vance, it looks like an opportunity. The incapacity clause in my CEO contract is a standard provision I negotiated 12 years ago when I first took the role formally. I drafted it to protect the company from genuinely impaired leadership. I never considered that it could be used against me by the people I designed it to protect the company from. If I sign the leave of absence, I surrender the chair. They install an interim CEO within 48 hours and the operating control of Stevens Logistics passes from my hands to a committee that will dismantle 30 years of architectural precision within a fiscal quarter. If I refuse and trigger a full audit, the financial investigators will find the ransom transfer. The kidnappers will see institutional intervention. The note was explicit, no discretionary notifications. The wolves have timed this beautifully. I give Vance credit for that, even as I want to reduce his career to a forensic exhibit. I do not touch the vellum. I read it with my eyes from 3 feet away and set my stylus down on the desk with a precise, deliberate click. The anomaly arrives quietly, the way the most important data always arrives, not with fanfare but with a faint wrongness that lodges in the peripheral vision and refuses to resolve. I have pulled the photograph back up on my private tablet, positioned behind a revenue projection spreadsheet at an angle that keeps Thorne in my sightline while allowing me to work. The architect's eye, the part of my brain trained on systems analysis and structural logistics, begins its evaluation with the detachment of a quality control audit. The signet ring. I zoom in. It is sitting at a canted angle on the proximal phalanx. This is wrong. I have spent 32 years watching that ring on my son's hand, and I know its weight and its relationship to the geometry of the knuckle beneath it. A ring on a living hand distributes its weight across mobile tissue and dynamic bone structure. The angle shifts with movement and position. But a ring on a severed finger, a finger that has been drained of blood and stored and handled, would settle into the lowest point of the knuckle architecture. It would sit flush, or shifted toward the palm side. It would not sit at this particular canted angle, which suggests a rigidity beneath the skin that doesn't match the expected collapse of soft tissue. The knuckle is too smooth. I zoom further. The skin tension across the proximal joint is uniform, too uniform. A human finger, even one artificially preserved, has a specific skeletal architecture that creates asymmetric surface topography. The joint prominence should be visible. The flexor tendon sheath should have pulled the distal section into partial flexion. This looks engineered. The cold that moves through me is a different temperature than the cold of the past 6 hours. This cold is precise. It has an edge. It is not the cold of grief or terror. It is the cold of a hypothesis forming. My operational suspicion triples in approximately 4 seconds. I keep my face entirely still. Excuse me. Thorne's phone vibrates against his breast pocket, a low, insistent buzz. He glances at the screen and moves toward the window, turning his back to the room by perhaps 40 degrees. It is not privacy. It is not enough of an angle to constitute privacy. But it is enough. My hand moves to the hidden compartment in the left panel of the desk, the one I had built during the renovation 11 years ago, accessible through a pressure plate in the second drawer that looks like a standard panel stop. I do not look at my hands. I maintain my gaze in the general direction of the window, tracking Thorne's reflection in the dark glass of the secondary terminal screen with my peripheral vision. The vacuum seal bag is where I left it. My fingers find the vial kit by touch, sterile, sealed, approximately the diameter of a pencil. I unseal it one-handed with the practiced speed of a woman who spent 2 years on pharmaceutical freight loading docks, where sterile chain protocols were enforced by federal regulation and personal discipline in equal measure. The microswab is in my fingers. I unseal the biohazard bag by the corner valve, the hiss is microscopic, contained, and touch the swab to the tissue residue clinging to the inside of the ring setting. My heart is hammering against my ribs. A frantic, rhythmic thud that feels entirely disconnected from the stillness of my hands and the neutrality of my face. The swab goes into the sterile vial. The vial seals. The biohazard bag reseals. The hidden compartment closes. Thorn turns back from the window. I am steepling my fingers. The Stevens Logistics Biocargo Quality Control application is, on its surface, exactly what its name suggests, a tracking system for the pharmaceutical and biological freight contracts that represent approximately 18% of our revenue. Temperature-controlled shipping containers, chain of custody documentation, automated lab handoffs. What it also is, by virtue of the infrastructure I built around it, is a high-priority, fully encrypted transport system for samples that I do not want processed through any channel my board can see. I generate the QC ticket in 11 keystrokes. Sample number 882. Destination, Private Lab 4. Priority, Sentinel. Private Lab 4 is not on any corporate org chart. It exists in the building documentation as a decommissioned materials testing facility in our New Haven freight hub. What it actually contains is a 6-person forensic analysis team I have maintained on retainer since the year a competitor attempted to defraud our pharmaceutical contracts with substituted samples. I installed them then and kept them afterward because I am a woman who understands the long-term value of infrastructure that exists outside the visible architecture. On the estate's hidden drone pad, flush with the north lawn, invisible from the driveway, the pad's existence not listed on any municipal permit filing, a carbon fiber quadcopter spins its rotors to life. Silent enough at 40 feet to be indistinguishable from a large bird. The pneumatic transport chute in my desk accepts the vial with a soft, sealed thump, pressurizing briefly before the external hatch engages. Thorn's head comes up. What was that? I look at him the way I look at junior associates who ask questions they should be able to answer themselves. The future, Doctor. We automate everything here. A beat. Even the trash. He looks at me for a moment that is slightly longer than comfortable. Then he writes in his notebook again. I sign the preliminary liquidation papers for the firm's secondary assets at 10:17 a.m. Each signature is a drop of blood. I am clear-eyed about this. The secondary assets, a logistics technology subsidiary in Denver, a partial stake in a container terminal in Baltimore, represent 11 years of strategic acquisition. They are not the heart of Stevens Logistics, but they are load-bearing. Their liquidation will create structural vulnerabilities that a competent opponent could exploit. I sign them with the deliberate calm of a surgeon performing a controlled resection. Remove the thing that needs to go. Stop the bleeding later. Vance watches the pen move across the vellum with an expression of satisfaction he is not entirely successful at concealing. The slight compression of his lips, the barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders. He believes he is watching a widow fold. He believes the midnight transactions combined with the psychiatrist's presence have finally broken the leverage point he has been searching for since Robert died. I let him believe it. I allow a slight tremor into my right hand as I sign the third page, a controlled, calibrated vulnerability, the kind of tell that a forensic psychiatrist trained in behavioral assessment will clock and record and weave into a narrative of cognitive stress. I need Thorne's notebook to read, subject exhibiting signs of duress consistent with emotional overwhelm. Capable of technical function but operating under significant psychological load. I need the narrative they're building to be plausible enough to satisfy them, but not so dramatic that they escalate to emergency proceedings. The tremor appears. It lasts 4 seconds. It disappears. Thorne writes something. Good. At 10:34, I lean back in my chair and fix Thorne with an unflinching gray stare. The market is a variable, Doctor, I say. Much like a human mind. What follows is 5 minutes that I construct with the precision of a closing argument. I use the vocabulary of systems engineering and behavioral economics, not because it is inaccessible, but because it occupies the exact register that makes certain men acutely uncomfortable. The language of precision wielded by a woman who is not performing it but inhabiting it. I discuss structural volatility in supply chain networks. I discuss the logistics of grief as a cognitive load balancing problem. I use the phrase, effective overhead, without irony. Vance's discomfort is visible in the set of his jaw and the way his hands have migrated from the tabletop to his lap, where they can clasp without being noticed. Thorne has stopped scribbling. He is watching me the way a man watches something that has confounded his hypothesis, not with admiration, but with the recalibrating stillness of a scientist whose experimental results have come back unexpected. He is no longer looking for a breakdown. He is looking at a woman who appears to have replaced her heart with a microprocessor, and he is trying to decide if this is the condition his clients described or something categorically different. I hold his gaze and do not offer him the resolution. The vibration on my wrist is different from a notification. It is a specific pattern, 3 short pulses, 1 long, 3 short, that I programmed into my watch 3 years ago when I first established the Sentinel infrastructure. I glance at the face. The minimalist display shows, in tight encrypted characters that require my visual key to decode, Sentinel initiated. Analysis 84% complete. The lab has the sample. The architect protocol is running in the background of my own infrastructure, entirely below the threshold of any surveillance the board has managed to install. I can feel it, not literally, but in the specific way that an engineer feels a system performing correctly, a kind of structural satisfaction that operates independently of emotion. I am no longer only a victim waiting for instructions. I am an auditor beginning a forensic review of a hostile takeover. The question is simply, which hostile takeover is the primary threat, the board, or the kidnappers? And are they, in fact, the same person wearing different masks? The thought arrives fully formed, and I set it aside to examine later. It is a hypothesis worth testing. Everything is worth testing. I look at the board, Vance with his shark eyes and his vellum documents, Thorne with his leather notebook and his recalibrating gaze, and then I look at the photograph of my son, still archived on my private tablet screen. Samuel's drugged eyes staring at nothing behind a matte black barrel. The 2 images sit in my mind simultaneously, and I examine their relationship the way I examine a routing conflict, not with panic, but with the patient, 3-dimensional attention of a systems architect mapping dependencies. To the kidnappers, I am the grieving mother who is liquidating her life. I am cooperating. I am terrified. I am exactly what they designed me to be. To the board, I am the crumbling CEO who is signing away her power under psychological duress. I am folding. I am vulnerable. I am exactly what 12 years of waiting has led Arthur Vance to believe I would eventually become. Both narratives are running simultaneously, and both audiences are watching me perform the version of Diana Stevens they need to see. Beneath the desk, my stylus is drafting a third path. I am waiting for the data. I am waiting for a forensic analysis that will either confirm that I am mourning a son or, and this hypothesis is gaining mass and momentum with every passing minute, confirm that I am being hunted by a ghost of my own making. I look at Vance. I smile, the tight, polite social smile, the one that lives entirely in the muscles around my mouth and reaches nowhere near my eyes. It is the smile of a predator who has decided to stop pretending she is prey. The tablet screen pulses blue. Not the warm amber of the study lamps, not the cold white of the morning sun, blue, the specific blue of a laboratory data interface, sterile and neutral and entirely without mercy. The report from Private Lab 4 loads as a single page of formatted analysis, the kind of spare, precise documentation that my forensic team produces because I trained them to omit everything that isn't data. I read it once. Then I read it again, not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because the mind requires a second pass when the first pass invalidates everything it believed for the past 8 hours. Sample analysis, polymer composite. 98% medical-grade silicone. DNA purity, 0%, synthetic derivative. Colorant matrix, iron oxide pigment suspension, glycerin base. Tissue classification, NON biological. The finger was not a finger. The blood was not blood. It was a chemical soup, iron oxide pigments in a glycerin carrier, thickened to achieve the appropriate viscosity and drying time. The ring was placed on a high-fidelity prosthetic sourced from somewhere with access to medical-grade silicone casting and the skill to replicate the specific topography of a human knuckle at a resolution sufficient to fool a woman in the dark, in shock, looking at something she desperately didn't want to see. I stare at the results. My breathing levels out, slow, rhythmic, involuntary, the way breathing levels when the body recognizes that the acute threat signal was false and begins the process of standing down. The physical horror that held me in its grip for 8 hours does not fade gradually. It evaporates. One moment it is present, and then it is not, and what it leaves behind is a vacuum, perfectly shaped, absolutely clean, and filling with something that has a very different temperature. Cold. Hard. Precise. Clarity. The realization arrives not as an emotional event but as a structural one. The sensation of a load-bearing calculation resolving, of a system that has been running on corrupted data finally receiving the corrected inputs and snapping back into coherent architecture. My son is not in a basement. My son is not bleeding. My son's hand is intact. My son has never been in danger, not from anyone other than the people he has voluntarily aligned himself with in the execution of a fraud designed, specifically and surgically, to weaponize the one thing he knew I would not think clearly in the presence of. He didn't threaten the company. He didn't threaten my reputation or my legacy or any of the variables I have hardened over 30 years of competitive business. He threatened Samuel. He threatened the mother. He found the crack in the architect's armor and he drove a chisel into it with both hands. I feel something shift in my posture, a physical event, not a metaphorical one. My shoulders square. The slight forward lean of a woman carrying weight straightens into the erect, architectural posture that is my natural state when I am operating at full capacity. The chair beneath me becomes a seat of authority rather than a refuge. The grief is gone. I search for it the way you probe a tooth that was aching and find nothing. The space where it lived is occupied by something crystalline and cold and, compared to grief, extraordinarily useful. I have moved from victim to auditor. I have moved from mother to CEO. Samuel Elliott Stevens is no longer my child in peril. He is a fraudulent subsidiary that has been misrepresenting its assets and has just triggered a forensic review. Everything is ready. The words come out in a low, steady hum, addressed to the empty study. I tap the final authorization on the wire transfer with the calm of a woman completing a routine transaction. To any external observer, to anyone monitoring the outgoing financials, to the board surveillance infrastructure, to whoever is waiting at the receiving end of this transfer, this looks like a desperate woman's final surrender. It looks like a grieving mother who has been cornered by a competency hearing and a countdown timer and the image of her son's drugged eyes, and who has finally, completely broken, and handed over $2.5 million to make the nightmare stop. What it actually is a net. The Sentinel protocol embeds at the packet level, not in the transfer amount, not in the metadata visible to the receiving institution, but woven into the cryptographic signature of each individual digital currency packet at a layer of the transaction architecture that no standard banking security system inspects. Each dollar is now a beacon. Each packet reports its GPS coordinates and IP handshake signatures on a 30-second cycle to a Sentinel monitoring node that runs on infrastructure registered to a shell entity in Liechtenstein that does not appear on any Stevens logistics document a board member has ever seen. I poisoned the stream. The money leaves my account in a single clean sweep. A cluster of Trojan horses moving into the dark, carrying everything I need to find the man who built this theater. Vance and the board stand up with the studied, careful control of men who have rehearsed their exit. They have prepared for the possibility that I would cry, or argue, or demand legal review, and they have prepared, too, for the possibility of dignified acquiescence, and this is what they are receiving, and it appears to be confounding them slightly, because dignified acquiescence from Diana Stevens at the moment of her defeat is not quite matching the emotional valence they expected. Thorne's notebook is closed. He is watching me with the expression of a man who has written a report he is not entirely comfortable submitting. "You've made the right choice for the company, Diana," Vance says. He tucks the signed leave of absence papers into his briefcase with the specific care of a man handling a trophy, not roughly, but with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who intends to display it. 12 years of waiting, folded into vellum and placed in Italian leather. I walk them to the study doors. I offer a weary nod, convincing, I think, because it requires no performance. I am genuinely tired. I have been awake for approximately 22 hours, I have processed a threat, a betrayal, a competency challenge, and a forensic reversal in sequence, and the fatigue is real even if my resolve is absolute. The footsteps recede down the corridor. The heavy front door opens and closes. The sound of two luxury sedans, a Mercedes and a Range Rover, I can tell them apart by engine note, moves down the gravel drive and fades into the ambient sound of the Greenwich morning. I return to the study. I turn the deadbolt. I turn the secondary deadbolt, the one I had installed after Robert died, the one the household staff thinks is decorative. The stage is clear. The Sentinel monitoring interface opens across 3 screens on my war room array, and what it shows me is money in motion, not the sluggish, uncertain movement of funds seeking a destination, but the high-speed, automated efficiency of a prearranged sweep. Someone built the receiving infrastructure before the transfer was sent. The routing is clean and confident. This was designed in advance. I watch the beacons move. Miami Server, a commercial hosting facility, the kind that asks no questions if the quarterly payment clears. Handoff time, 11 seconds. Mexico City, a private correspondent bank I recognize from 3 years ago when I reviewed a failed acquisition target's offshore structure. The bank clears the funds through a domestic account and pushes them forward without pause. The signal moves south and east. Quintana Roo. I feel something I can only describe as structural recognition, the specific satisfaction of a logistic system resolving a route I have been tracking through fog. The money isn't heading for a criminal network's dark web architecture. It isn't heading for a cryptocurrency mixer or an anonymous exchange. It is heading for a geographic location with a physical address and a property record and, almost certainly, a pool with a view of the Caribbean. Not a warehouse. Not a cell. A playground. The speed of the transfer suggests an automated victory lap, a sweep pre-programmed to execute the moment the funds cleared, designed by someone who expected success and wanted to celebrate efficiently. It has the fingerprints of a person who is good at anticipating wins and poor at planning for complications. My stylus taps against my palm. Tap. 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 The signal stabilizes. I run the coordinate set through a back channel I maintain for competitive intelligence, a database of international property holdings cross-referenced with corporate registry data from 17 jurisdictions. The result loads in 40 seconds. Blue Horizon Holdings, LLC. Registered, Cayman Islands. Property, Lot 847, Riviera Maya Coastal Zone, Quintana Roo, MX. Classification, Luxury Residential. Square footage, 12,400. Amenities, private pool, deepwater dock, staff quarters. Blue Horizon Holdings. I know that name. I know it the way you know the name of a recurring line item that keeps appearing in reports you've reviewed for reasons unrelated to this moment. A name that lodges in the memory not because it was important at the time but because something in the pattern recognition architecture of a systems analyst flags repetition. I pull my records. 3 years ago, Samuel came to me with an investment opportunity, a hospitality development on the Yucatan coast that he described as a ground floor entry into the boutique resort market. I declined to fund it. He took the $50,000 personal loan I gave him that same quarter and I did not ask what he spent it on. He spent it on a shell company. He spent it on a down payment for a villa on the Riviera Maya. And then he used my fear, used the image of my husband's ring and a prosthetic finger and his own face crying on a concrete wall, to fund the rest of it. The audacity has a quality to it that transcends ordinary dishonesty. It is almost architectural in its ambition. Almost. Almost, because a truly good architect doesn't leave traceable property records under a shell company name she's seen before. The villa's local network is secured by a commercial system, expensive, brand name, the kind of enterprise security package that a person buys when they want to feel protected without understanding what protection actually requires. It is, as I had suspected from the property profile, the digital equivalent of a gold-plated gate with the latch left open. My black box sniffing tool finds the network handshake in 11 seconds. The firewall has one unpatched vulnerability, a firmware update the system administrator failed to apply, likely because no one remembered to schedule it, likely because the kind of people who run a cartel-safe house on the Riviera Maya do not typically employ a dedicated IT security team. I am through the firewall in under 90 seconds. The internal Nest camera system loads across my monitors in a cascade of high-definition feeds: the front gate, the dock, the kitchen, the ground floor corridor, and the pool deck. The pool deck feed is the one that matters. Caribbean sunlight falls across white tile in the particular way it only falls at this latitude, direct, bleaching, without the angular softness of northern light. The sound that bleeds through my speakers is oceanic, waves against the deep water dock, a rhythmic crash and pull that fills my mahogany study with the incongruous brightness of a resort afternoon. I sit in my Connecticut study, in the shadows, and look at my son in the sun. He is in a white linen shirt. Not shredded. Not blood-soaked. A clean, pressed, expensive white linen shirt with the collar open and the sleeves rolled to the elbow, the kind of studied casual that requires a certain amount of effort to achieve. He is reclined on a sun chair with the ease of a man who has been here long enough to feel at home. His hands are intact. Both of them, perfectly intact, wrapped around a condensation-beaded glass of amber liquid that I recognize, from the color and the way the ice sits, as a quality bourbon. He is laughing at something one of the men around him has said, a real laugh, loose and unguarded, the laugh of a man who believes he has finished the difficult part and is now in the celebration phase. He tosses something into the air and catches it. Tosses and catches. Tosses and catches. The heavy gold signet ring catches the light on each arc, a brief, bright flash, spinning against the blue sky, falling back into his palm. The ring he stole from my jewelry box. The ring I watched him accept from my hand 12 years ago at his father's memorial service. The ring he placed on a silicone prop and packed into a cheap cardboard box that smelled of ozone and sent to my estate at midnight to convince me that his hand had been severed. He is tossing it like a coin. The three men around him have the specific physical grammar of hired muscle, the bored, watchful stillness, the sidearms carried with the casual familiarity of tools, the hard faces of men whose loyalty is a financial arrangement rather than a personal one. They are not holding Samuel. They are waiting. They are waiting for their percentage of a payment that I am increasingly certain Samuel has not been honest with them about. He has used a Quintana Roo syndicate to stage a kidnapping fraud against his own mother, and he has done so with the cheerful recklessness of a man who has never once sat across from someone who actually understands the cartel's accounting methods. I watch him for a long minute. 63 seconds, by the minimalist watch face. I count them because counting is still, apparently, my last available mechanism when the rest of my systems are running checks. I am looking for the spark. The specific, involuntary warmth, the last ember of the bond that was forged the night I held him in a hospital in Greenwich and understood for the first time what it meant to have created something outside of a spreadsheet. The feeling that has overridden my logic 100 times in 32 years. The reason I kept giving the personal loans, kept answering the calls, kept opening the door when the investment schemes failed and the gambling debts mounted and the entrepreneurial ventures dissolved like sugar in rain. I look at my son laughing on a sun chair with my money and my father's ring and a cartel's muscle standing guard. I wait. Nothing. The silence in my study is not the silence of grief or shock or suppressed emotion. It is the silence of a system that has completed its diagnostic and found nothing to report. The silence of a final calculation. The last thread snaps. I don't feel it dramatically, no shudder, no tears, no moment of cinematic devastation. It is a clean, surgical click, the way a circuit breaker trips when the load exceeds the threshold. Protective, really. The system protecting itself from permanent damage by removing the connection. The boy I raised no longer exists in any meaningful operational sense. What is on that pool deck is a liability. And I am the woman who restructures liabilities. I do not reach for the phone to call the FBI. I do not call the IRS fraud line, or the State Department, or my corporate attorney, or any of the dozen institutional mechanisms available to a woman of my resources and connections who has just confirmed that she is the victim of a wire fraud conspiracy. I open the Stevens Logistics Global Manifest. 3 high-value shipping containers are currently docked at Cozumel, a pharmaceutical freight hold for a client contract that has a 48-hour processing window before the customs dwell time penalty triggers. I reroute them. The rerouting creates a flag in the Cozumel Port Authority's digital system, a customs hold request that I have the authority to generate, that looks entirely routine to anyone reading the manifest, and that happens to create a digital breadcrumb inside the Interbank Sentinel Network's money laundering detection protocol. I flag the villa's IP address. Suspected instrument of wire fraud. Suspected money laundering vehicle. The flag goes into the Sentinel Network's reporting queue, not to law enforcement directly, but into the interinstitutional monitoring system that banks and regulators subscribe to for exactly this category of cross-border financial crime. It is the kind of flag that takes time to process, that moves through channels methodically rather than dramatically. It is not a weapon. It is a fuse. I have been doing this for 30 years. I have broken competitors not through confrontation but through the systematic removal of their operational oxygen. You identify their dependencies, you apply pressure to the pressure points, and you wait for the structural failure to cascade. Samuel is a gambler. Samuel borrowed the cartel's muscle on the promise of a larger percentage than he intends to honor. Samuel is currently sitting on a pool deck in a villa whose IP address is now flagged in 3 separate monitoring systems, while the men around him are waiting for a payment he has no intention of making. I am not calling for help. I am adjusting the variables of his environment until the air becomes unbreathable. I zoom in on the pool deck feed. The 3 men with Samuel have the specific tattoo vocabulary of Quintana Roo syndicate muscle. I know this because Stevens Logistics operates freight infrastructure in that corridor, and I have spent time studying the criminal ecosystem that operates alongside it, because understanding who controls the docks is part of understanding how to protect my cargo. I recognize the affiliation. I recognize, with a certain cold clarity, what it means for Samuel that he has promised these men a cut he cannot deliver. He is a gambler who has seated himself at a table populated by players who do not accept IOUs and do not have a sentimental reluctance to collect on debts. He believes he is the smartest person at the table. He believes the charm and the theatrical talent that has manipulated his mother for 32 years will serve him equally well with men who have no interest in his performance. He is wrong. I do not need to manufacture his consequences. I simply need to ensure that the consequences he has already engineered for himself arrive on the correct timeline. The house always wins. Samuel has always been too busy watching the other players to remember that. I cross to my personal jewelry safe, a fire-rated box mounted behind the false panel in the east wall of the study, accessible through a combination dial that I change quarterly. The interior is organized with the same precision as everything else I maintain. Documents in the upper tier, jewelry in the lower, each piece in its own velvet-lined compartment. I rotate the dial. The door swings open. Nestled in the center of the lower tier, in a compartment slightly larger than the others to accommodate its weight, sits the actual signet ring, the one my husband wore on his right hand for 28 years, the one I took from his finger at the funeral home with my own hands because I could not bear the thought of a stranger handling it. The one I have kept, not worn, because wearing it felt like a claim I hadn't earned. The ring Samuel stole months ago, the one currently being tossed in the Caribbean sunlight, was a decoy. I had noticed the entrepreneurial thievery beginning approximately 4 months ago, small items disappearing, valuables going missing in the way that things go missing when someone with access to the estate needs cash and believes a mother's grief will prevent a forensic inventory. I placed the decoy in the obvious location and moved the original. I had not anticipated this specific application. But I had anticipated something. I slide the heavy gold band onto my right index finger. It is cold. Substantial. The weight of it is different from anything else I own, not the weight of an object, but the weight of a history. Robert's hands. Robert's legacy. The company that bore his name until I made it worthy of bearing it. I look at my reflection in the dark glass of the monitor. The mahogany hair, the steel-gray eyes, the angular face with its high, sharp cheekbones and its narrow, determined jaw. The face of a woman who is not grieving. The face of a woman who has completed her diagnostic and identified the corrective action. The mother is gone. The architect has a final audit to perform. The study lighting requires 3 adjustments before it satisfies me. The first setting is too warm, amber tones that suggest comfort, domesticity, the soft edges of a home. I eliminate it. The second is too flat, overhead diffusion that washes out the mahogany backdrop and turns my face into a clinical document rather than a deliberate statement. I eliminate that too. The third is what I want, the study's architectural sconces set to 60%, angled to throw the bookshelf and the heavy wood paneling into sharp relief behind me, the desk lamp positioned low and to the left so that the shadows fall with purpose. The room looks exactly as it should look, like the interior of a mind that has been organized by someone with no patience for disorder. I open the Ghost Node broadcast channel on my encrypted terminal. It is a protocol I built for logistics blackouts, for the moments when a freight emergency requires me to push information to receivers who cannot be verified through standard channels, when I need a one-way transmission that leaves no negotiation window, no reply path, no invitation for dialogue. I push, they receive, the channel closes. I have used it exactly 4 times in 11 years, all for genuine operational emergencies. This qualifies. I do not want a conversation with my son. A conversation implies 2 parties withstanding at the table, and Samuel has spent this entire day demonstrating that he does not understand what standing costs. I want a broadcast. I want a record. I want to document the closure of a failed account with the same cold efficiency I would bring to any other write-off. I calibrate the frame, my face, my shoulders, my right hand resting on the desk. Specific, deliberate. The camera activates, its indicator light shifting from amber standby to a steady, cold crimson. I look into the lens. I am not the woman who trembled 8 hours ago in this room. That woman has been fully metabolized. What remains is the architect, the original, the baseline, the version of Diana Stevens that exists beneath every role she has ever played. She is not angry. She is not grieving. She is a machine of record, and she is documenting the closure. I raise my right hand. Slowly, with deliberation. The heavy gold signet ring catches the study light, the real one, the weight of 28 years of Robert's daily were still somehow present in the metal, the Stevens crest in sharp relief against my ivory skin. I hold it level with the camera lens and I wait. 10 seconds. I count them. Not from habit this time, but because the pause is intentional, a structural element of the broadcast, not a hesitation. I want Samuel, watching this feed on whatever device he has in that Cancun villa, to look at the ring for 10 full seconds before I say a word. I want him to feel the specific, disorienting vertigo of a plan collapsing at its own foundation. He thought he used the ring to break me. He thought the weight of it, the symbol of a father he never respected and a mother he could not outlast, was his most effective weapon. I want him to watch it sitting on my finger, on my hand, in my study, in perfect safety, and understand in his body before he understands in his mind that the foundation was sand. My expression is a blank slate. Not cold, blankness is more unsettling than coldness, because cold implies residual heat, implies something that once burned and might burn again. Blankness is architectural, Blankness says, there was never anything here that belonged to you. You were always a poor logistician, Samuel. My voice comes out low and rhythmic, the specific register I use for board presentations and contract negotiations, the voice that communicates that what follows has been considered carefully and will not be revised. Not a rasp of emotion. A rasp of finality. A good architect checks the materials before building the frame. I let the pause land with the weight of a dropped file. Your silicone was medical grade. I'll give you that. The casting was convincing under emotional distress and insufficient lighting. But your blood chemistry was a joke. Iron oxide and glycerin. I've seen more convincing hemoglobin in a Halloween supply catalog. I am watching his feed on the secondary monitor as I speak, the pool deck camera, the high-definition Caribbean afternoon. I can see him processing the broadcast now. The bourbon glass is still in his hand but no longer being held with any confidence. I audited your kidnapping at 10:14 a.m. I let the clinical precision of the timestamp do its work. You've been a failing asset for 32 years. You've had quarters with potential. Early stage indicators that suggested you might eventually develop the operational spine your father had. But this morning, Samuel, you finally triggered the total loss threshold. I tip my head very slightly, the way I tip it when I am explaining a self-evident conclusion to someone who should have reached it independently. You became a write-off. I see him stand up from the sun chair. I lean forward. The lens resolves my eyes in sharp detail, steel gray, unblinking, the eyes of a woman who has been looking at numbers for 40 years and has become, in some fundamental way, indistinguishable from the systems she built. By killing yourself on that video, you did me a final favor. I deliver this without inflection. You created legal documentation of your own death. You provided footage, timestamps, and a geographic origin that my attorneys are currently processing as evidence in a missing persons and suspected homicide report filed with the Greenwich PD this morning. A beat. To the world, you are a tragedy. A family's grief. A cautionary story about the pressures of inherited wealth. Another beat, smaller. To me, you are a vacated space in the ledger. On the villa feed, I watch him absorb this. The glass slips in his fingers, not falling, not yet, but the grip has gone uncertain. His body is ahead of his mind right now, processing what his intellect is still trying to refuse. He has spent this entire operation thinking about what he was taking. He did not think, with any rigor, about what he was surrendering. He staged his own death to extract money from his mother, and his mother has accepted the premise. Samuel Stevens is legally dead. Samuel Stevens has no claim on anything Diana Stevens owns, controls, or will ever build. Samuel Stevens has deleted himself from every document, every succession plan, every consideration, and handed me the evidence. He didn't just steal $2.5 million. He accidentally erased himself. The money, I say. The cold smirk arrives, the genuine one, the narrow one that only appears when something has resolved exactly as it should. The $2.5 million is currently sitting in your account. The transfer cleared. The Sentinel protocol traveled with it, but from your end, it looks clean. I pause. It isn't. I tap the burn command. I flagged the transfer as a high-level cartel money laundering operation approximately 40 minutes ago. The packet signatures were structured to mimic exactly the kind of layered cross-border movement that triggers joint IRS and DEA automated review, the kind of review that gets escalated to the Mexican federals when the terminal address resolves to a Quintana Roo coastal property with known syndicate associations. I let the geography of this settle. The ping went out 30 seconds after the transfer cleared. That was 40 minutes ago, Samuel. I watch him through the villa camera. The money is no longer a prize. It is a homing beacon for every federal agency you have spent your adult life structuring your finances to avoid. A pause so short it is barely a pause. You didn't fund your escape. You built a lighthouse. And you turned your sanctuary into a crime scene. The panic on the pool deck is not cinematic. There is no dramatic revelation moment, no single gesture of theatrical collapse. It happens the way real fear happens in real people, in pieces, in the progressive failure of a man's confidence in his own assessment of a situation. I watch it happen in quadrants on my secondary monitor. Samuel stumbles backward. Not falls, stumbles, his heels catching on the tile edge, his arms going out for balance. The bourbon glass leaves his hand and hits the marble decking. I can't hear it over the ocean sound bleeding through my speakers, but I see the spray of amber liquid and ice across the white tile. He looks at his hands, both of them, intact, the ring gone now, his hands the hands of a man who suddenly understands that the prop he built his entire scheme around is circling back toward him at velocity. He looks at the tablet on the poolside table. The sentinel alerts are visible even at this resolution. Red banner notifications cascading down the screen with the mechanical indifference of automated systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. He looks toward the ocean. The deep-water dock. The exit strategy he presumably built into his plan, the open water, the boat, the distance between the Riviera Maya and wherever a man with resources and no scruples goes when a scheme collapses. He looks at it the way a man looks at a door he has just realized he cannot reach. I see his face, even at this resolution, even through the compression of a security camera feed at 40 feet, the arrogance has curdled. The performance is over. What's left is the raw animal fear of a man who has been outplayed by the person who gave him life, and who is only now, in this moment on this pool deck in the Caribbean sun, understanding that the love she felt for him was the only thing that ever kept her predatory instincts from turning in his direction. The love is gone. The cartel muscle has been watching Samuel since the first stumble. They are professionals in a specific and narrow sense. They are professional assessors of threat and liability, and they are very good at reading the moment when a situation's risk profile changes. The man with the jagged scar across his throat moves first. He crosses the pool deck in 4 measured steps and snatches the tablet from the poolside table with the economy of motion of someone who has done this before. He does not speak English. This is not an obstacle. Red alert banners and digital tracer notifications in federal law enforcement typography communicate in a universal language that requires no translation. He reads them. He looks at Samuel. He looks at the matte black pistol in his waistband with the specific expression of a man performing a cost-benefit analysis. The camaraderie of the morning, the celebration, the shared bourbon, the comfortable assumption of mutual benefit, is dead. It died somewhere between the first red banner and the word federals appearing in the alert text. To these men, Samuel is no longer a client. Samuel is a liability. And they deal with liabilities with considerably less patience, and considerably less restraint, than I ever managed in 32 years of maternal indulgence. I watched the man with the scar turn toward Samuel. I watched the other 2 stand up from their chairs with the unhurried, purposeful movement of men who have made a decision. I had said I was adjusting the variables of his environment until the air became unbreathable. The air has become unbreathable. I execute the lockdown macro. The villa's smart home system, lazily configured, expensively appointed, now entirely under my administrative access, receives the command and begins its sequence with the hydraulic certainty of well-engineered infrastructure following proper instructions. The wrought iron perimeter gates hiss shut on their electronic tracks, the heavy bolts engaging with a resonant, structural click that I imagine I can hear through the security camera feed even though I cannot. The hurricane shutters, designed for Quintana Roo storm season, reinforced, motorized, capable of sealing every glass wall on the property in under 90 seconds, begin their descent. The glass walls disappear behind panels of steel-reinforced composite. The villa folds in on itself, systematically, sealing like a tomb. I cut the power to the garage. I cut the power to the dock controls. The boat at the deep water dock is still there. It is now inaccessible. On my monitor, The pool deck camera feed shows a property transforming around a man who is watching his exits close one by one, each closure accompanied by the smooth, mechanical sound of systems operating exactly as designed. The men around him are watching the shutters descend with expressions that have moved past professional assessment into something more personal. I am not in Cancun. I am sitting in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a study that smells of old paper and expensive espresso, in perfect safety, and I am providing the container. The contents will handle themselves. Goodbye, Samuel. The words come out as a single, clean, final note, not warm, not angry, not weighted with the accumulated sentiment of 32 years. A note of closure. The last entry in a ledger before it is archived. Don't bother responding. I've already cut the feed. I strike the key. The broadcast channel collapses. The ghost node dissolves. The connection to the villa's internal camera system closes in sequence, the pool deck feed going black, then the corridor, then the gate camera, then the dock. The monitors die one by one, each screen going to black with a soft, electronic sigh, until the only light in my study is the warm amber of the desk lamp and the architectural shadows of the mahogany walls. I sit in the dark. The silence is different from this morning's silence, different from the silence of 11:58 p.m. when a courier package smelled of ozone and cheap cardboard and the world as I understood it was approximately 30 seconds from its structural revision. That silence was the silence of a tomb, airless and accusatory, full of the ghost of every Sunday I didn't come home. This silence is the silence of a machine running at peak efficiency. Organized. Clean. A workspace that has been cleared of everything that was cluttering it and is now ready for the next project. I sit in it for a moment and let it settle around me like a well-tailored suit. I pick up the desk phone and dial from memory. Sarah Chen answers on the second ring. She is my lead attorney, 44 years old, Harvard Law, the kind of brilliant that expresses itself as absolute reliability rather than performance. She has been on retainer for 9 years and she answers her phone at any hour without complaint because she understands that when I call, something structural needs to happen immediately. Sarah. I keep my voice level. The medical emergency regarding my son has reached its conclusion. I'm sending you the forensic data on the fraud, lab analysis, digital transaction traces, Sentinel protocol logs, and the original video footage with the metadata intact. The footage constitutes documentation of a staged death, which invalidates the board's competency challenge on its face. I pause. Prepare the nullification filings. I want them ready to serve by end of business today. I hear the sound of her pulling up a document on her end, the specific click of a mechanical keyboard that means she is already working. If Arthur Vance gives you any trouble, I continue, tell him I've recently become quite interested in the logistics of certain offshore account structures I came across during a routine competitive intelligence review. Tell him I find the geography of those structures very suggestive. A beat. He'll understand the terminology. I hang up without waiting for a reply. The corporate coup is over. Arthur Vance will be back in his office in Greenwich by 3:30, having had a triumphant lunch, and Sarah's filing will be waiting for him like a cold hand on the shoulder. The board's competency challenge rests entirely on the midnight capital movements and the erratic liquidity shifts they documented. The forensic evidence I am sending Sarah will demonstrate that those movements were my response to a documented extortion attempt, a criminal fraud, which transforms the board's exhibit from evidence of incompetence into evidence of a CEO under duress responding to a threat with rational, if unconventional, countermeasures. The shares I signed away will be recovered through the nullification proceedings. The signatures Vance tucked into his briefcase like a trophy will be worth exactly what the vellum cost him. I open the facilities management application on my tablet. The estate systems are well organized. I redesigned the management infrastructure 2 years ago during a renovation, replacing the legacy building automation with a fully integrated platform that I can operate from any device on the property. Work orders, maintenance schedules, room use authorizations, all of it accessible, all of it responsive. I authorize a new work order. Project, server migration. Location, East Wing, formerly Bedroom 2. Scope, full clearance and infrastructure build-out. Priority, NON urgent. Completion target, 72 hours. I watched the digital blueprint update in real time, the floor plan of the East Wing reconfiguring itself on my screen as the work order parameters are applied. The room that appears in the northeast corner of the second floor, the one with the window that faces the maple trees, the one that still contains a narrow bed and a desk with a chess set in the closet. It becomes a server room. The trophies from the youth sailing club Samuel joined at 11 and quit at 12. The designer clothes in the wardrobe, still tagged from the purchases I funded. The framed photographs on the wall that I selected personally when I hired an interior decorator to furnish a room I was already spending too little time to visit. All of it, cleared by noon tomorrow. I need the space for the Sentinel hardware expansion. The new server arrays require climate control and dedicated fiber infrastructure, and the East Wing has the best thermal characteristics in the building for that application. It is a more efficient use of the square footage. I look at the updated blueprint for a moment, the clean, rectilinear room labeled server room where the label Bedroom 2 used to be, and I feel exactly nothing. No hesitation. No ceremonial grief. The space was always mine, I paid for every inch of it. Now I am simply using it for something that serves my purposes. The architect does not preserve monuments to failures. She builds forward. The sun drops below the horizon at 5:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I am watching it, the long, geometric shadows stretching across my desk as the light changes from late afternoon gold to the deeper, amber-tinted dimness of early evening. The shadows are clean. They fall at precise angles across the blotter, the same blotter that held, 14 hours ago, a waxy prosthetic and a dark halo of iron oxide and glycerin. The blotter is clean. I replaced it at noon, the old one rolled and disposed of with the clinical efficiency of a woman who understands that evidence you have already catalogued and submitted no longer needs to be physically present. I open the study's wine cabinet, a narrow, temperature-controlled unit built into the east wall, stocked with a small selection of bottles that I curate personally rather than delegating. I pour a single glass of the Fonseca Vintage Port, the 1994, the bottle I opened 2 years ago when Stevens Logistics cleared its first billion-dollar quarter and then resealed because a celebration shared with no one still counts. The liquid is the same deep mahogany as the wood around me. The same depth of color, the same amber undertone in the lamplight. I carry it back to my chair. I sit perfectly erect. My hands are steepled, pressed together at the fingertips with their habitual, practiced architecture. The signet ring catches the last geometric slant of the evening light, a brief, warm flash from the Stevens crest, the crossed anchors in relief, the weight of it solid and real and where it belongs. The house is silent. Not the silence of a tomb. Not the suffocating, airless silence of a woman sitting in a curated graveyard at midnight, staring at evidence of her own failures. This is the silence of a machine running at peak efficiency. Every system in its correct state, every variable accounted for, every process executing exactly as designed. I lift the glass. I take a sip of the port, deep, layered, the complex warmth of 3 decades in wood, and I open the planning document I use for quarterly expansion strategy. The cursor blinks on a blank page. The same blinking cursor that stared back at me this morning when my digital vision had gone dark and the data strings were gibberish. The cursor is not gibberish now. It is an invitation. I begin to type. The logistics of next quarter's expansion, 3 new freight corridors in Southeast Asia, a strategic acquisition target in Rotterdam, a pilot automation program for the Singapore hub, unfold across the screen in clean, precise language. Objectives. Timelines. Resource requirements. Dependencies. The mother is gone. The architect remains. She picks up her stylus and she builds. If you made it to this moment, thank you for listening all the way through. Most people bail before the bill comes due. But here, the bill always comes due. What started as humiliation and disrespect ended with receipts, truth, and a payoff they never saw coming. If you want more stories where karma shows up without mercy, hit subscribe and come back for the next one. Now tell me in the comments, what was the most disgusting thing they did? What crossed the line for you?